The wind howled like a living thing across the jagged peaks of the Sierra Madre Occidental, whipping snow into a blinding frenzy that stung Elena's cheeks like tiny needles. She huddled against the rough bark of a pine tree, her breath coming in shallow gasps that fogged the air before vanishing into the white void. It was her third day lost in these unforgiving mountains, far from the dusty trails of Chihuahua where she'd started this fool's errand. Elena Vargas, a 32-year-old schoolteacher from a small village near Creel, had never imagined her life could unravel so quickly. One moment, she was chasing a story for her blog, something about ancient Tarahumara legends whispered among the Raramuri people, and the next, she was separated from her guide, abandoned in a storm that turned the world into a frozen labyrinth. Elena's mind raced back to how it all began. She'd arrived in the Sierra Madre 2 weeks earlier, driven by a mix of curiosity and desperation. Life in her village had grown stifling. A recent divorce from her unfaithful husband Marco left her drowning in debt and doubt. Teaching history to wide-eyed children by day and scrolling through social media by night, she'd stumbled upon tales of lost treasures hidden in the mountains, stories of Spanish gold and indigenous spirits that promised not just wealth, but redemption. Why not, she'd thought, packing her backpack with maps, a satellite phone that now lay dead in her pocket, and a heart hungry for adventure. Her friend Sophia had warned her, "Elena, those mountains eat people whole. Stay in the valleys where it's safe." But Eleanor, with her dark curls tied back and a stubborn fire in her brown eyes, had laughed it off. Now that fire was just a flicker against the encroaching cold. The storm had hit without mercy on the second day of their hike. Her guide, a wiry Raramuri man named Javier, with sun-leathered skin and a quiet demeanor that hid years of navigating these trails, had promised it would be a short detour to a sacred cave. "The ancestors watch over us here," he'd said in his soft, accented Spanish, his eyes scanning the horizon like a hawk. Javier was the kind of man who moved with the land, silent, reliable, with a faded tattoo of a deer on his forearm from his youth running ultramarathons in the canyons. But when the snow thickened and visibility dropped to nothing, panic crept into his voice for the first time. "We turn back," he'd shouted over the gale, grabbing her arm. Elena had pulled away, insisting on one more push toward the cave's glow she swore she'd seen on her map. Just a little farther, this could change everything. That was the last she saw of him. In the chaos, a gust knocked her sideways into a drift, and when she clawed her way out, Javier was gone, swallowed by the whiteout. She called his name until her throat burned, but the wind carried her cries away like echoes in a dream. Now, alone, Eleanor's fingers, numb inside her thin gloves, fumbled with the last energy bar in her pack. It was half-frozen, tasting like cardboard and regret. The temperature had plummeted as night fell, and the Sierra's winter bite was legendary. She'd heard stories from the villagers about hikers who wandered off and never returned, their bodies found months later, preserved in ice like forgotten relics. Was Javier out there, searching for her, or had he made it back to the trailhead, assuming she was the one who'd vanished for good? As the snow piled higher around her makeshift shelter, a lean-to of branches she'd scraped together with trembling hands, Elena's thoughts turned inward, a whirlwind of emotions crashing harder than the storm outside. Fear gnawed at her first, sharp and primal, imagining wild animals prowling the darkness or the slow creep of hypothermia dulling her senses. But beneath it simmered anger, at Javier for leading her here, at herself for ignoring the signs, at Marco for shattering her trust so completely that she'd run to these mountains seeking solace in myths. Tears froze on her lashes as memories flooded in. Their wedding in the village square, under strings of papel picado fluttering in the breeze, and the bitter fights that ended with him storming out to the cantina. "You're too dreamy, Elena," he'd sneered once. "Always chasing ghosts." If only she could prove him wrong now. A distant crack echoed through the trees, maybe a branch snapping under the weight of snow, or something more sinister. Elena's heart pounded, her body tensing as she peered into the gloom. The Sierra Madre wasn't just mountains, it was alive with secrets. The Raramuri spoke of spirits in the wind, guardians of the land who tested the unworthy. Javier had shared one such tale around the campfire their first night. A woman lost in the snow, guided home by a wolf's howl that turned out to be her own soul calling back. Elena had dismissed it as folklore, but now, shivering uncontrollably, she wondered, what if she was that woman? What if this isolation was her test, not for gold, but for survival? She forced herself to move, stomping her feet to keep the blood flowing, her boots crunching into the fresh powder. The cold seeped through her wool coat, the one her abuela had knitted years ago, its patterns of interlocking diamonds now caked in ice. In the distance, faint lights flickered. Or was it her imagination? No, just the moon playing tricks through the clouds. Elena's satellite phone was useless without signal, its battery long drained from futile attempts to call for help. She thought of her students back home, little faces like Maria's, with braids and gap-toothed smiles, waiting for her lessons on Aztec warriors and resilient queens. Would they miss her? Would anyone? As the night deepened, a strange rustle cut through the wind, soft, almost tentative, like paws on snow. Elena froze, her breath catching. From the shadows of the pines emerged a small shape, eyes gleaming yellow in the dim light. It was a wolf pup, no bigger than a house cat, its fur matted and white-dusted, ribs visible under its coat. It tilted its head, sniffing the air, and took a hesitant step closer. Eleanor's pulse thundered. Wolves weren't common this low, but hunger drove them anywhere. Yet this one didn't bare teeth or growl. Instead it whimpered, a pitiful sound that tugged at something deep in her chest. She extended a hand, palm up, whispering, "Easy, little one. I'm not going to hurt you." The pup circled once, then nudged her fingers with its cold nose, a warmth spreading from the touch that chased away the chill for a fleeting moment. In that instant, amid the isolation and fear, Elena felt a spark of connection, an unlikely ally in the frozen wilderness. But as it pressed closer, nuzzling her glove, she couldn't shake the eerie feeling that this was no ordinary encounter. What secrets did this pup carry from the heart of the Sierra? And could it be the key to her escape, or just another twist in her deepening nightmare? The storm raged on, burying the world in silence. But Elena's story was only beginning. Little did she know, the pup's arrival marked the start of a bond that would challenge everything she believed about survival, family, and the wild unknown. Elena watched the wolf pup with wide eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The little creature's nose was still pressed against her glove, its breath warm and ragged, carrying the faint, musky scent of wet fur and pine sap. She didn't dare move at first, every instinct screaming to pull away. This was a wild animal, after all, born in the savage heart of the Sierra Madre, where survival meant teeth and claws. But there was something in those golden eyes, a vulnerability that mirrored her own, that held her still. The pup let out another soft whimper, circling her legs with tentative steps, its paws leaving faint prints in the snow that quickly filled with fresh flakes. Slowly, Eleanor lowered her hand further, letting her fingers brush the top of its head. The fur was coarse, dusted with ice crystals that melted under her touch, revealing patches of grey beneath the white camouflage. "What are you doing out here, Chico?" she murmured, her voice barely above the wind's moan. It was the first words she'd spoken aloud in hours, and they felt strange on her tongue, laced with a mix of fear and an unexpected tenderness. Back in her village, she'd always been the one coaxing stray dogs with scraps from her kitchen, earning her the nickname La Protectora among the kids. But this was no village mutt. This was a piece of the wild, and the line between savior and supper was razor thin in these mountains. The pup responded by leaning into her leg, its body trembling not just from the cold, but from exhaustion. Elena's gaze flicked to her backpack, where the remnants of her energy bar lay crumbled. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but she couldn't ignore the way the pup's ribs pressed against its sides, like the bars of a cage too small for its frame. Fishing out a small piece, she broke it off and held it out. The pup sniffed cautiously, then snatched it with a quick snap of jaws that made her flinch. It chewed voraciously, eyes never leaving hers, and when it finished, it nudged her hand again, as if asking for more. Elena chuckled softly, a sound swallowed by the storm, and obliged with another morsel. "You're a hungry one, aren't you? Lost your family too?" As they shared the meager meal, the wind seemed to ease just a fraction, or maybe it was the warmth of the pup's body seeping through her pants that made the night feel less hostile. Elena shifted, pulling her knees up and wrapping her arms around them, inviting the pup closer. It didn't hesitate, curling into the curve of her side with a sigh that sounded almost relieved. The contact was electric, a living heater against the numbness creeping into her bones. She stroked its back gently, feeling the rapid beat of its heart sync with her own slowing pulse. For the first time since Javier vanished, the isolation didn't feel quite so crushing. It was as if the mountains had sent her a companion, a fragile bridge across the abyss. But peace was fleeting in the Sierra. As the hours ticked by, marked only by the deepening shadows under the pines, Elena's mind wandered back to the life she'd fled. She thought of her abuela, Rosa, with her wrinkled hands that smelled of corn tortillas and sage, the woman who'd raised her after her parents died in a flash flood down in the valleys. "The land gives and takes, mija," Rosa used to say, her voice gravelly from years of storytelling by the fire. "But it always tests your heart first." Elena had sat at her feet as a girl, absorbing tales of the Raramuri runners who danced with the spirits, outpacing death itself. Those stories had fueled her blog, her escape from the mundane rhythm of grading papers and dodging Marco's barbs. Now, huddled with this pup, she wondered if Rosa's wisdom was proving true. Was this test about enduring the cold, or something deeper, like learning to trust again after betrayal? The pup stirred suddenly, its ears perking up as a low growl rumbled from its throat. Elena tensed, following its gaze into the swirling snow. Branches creaked nearby, heavier than the wind alone could manage, and a distant howl pierced the night. Not the pup's, but something larger, more menacing. Wolves traveled in packs. She knew that much from Javier's campfire warnings. "They sing to their own, but strangers are meat," he'd said, his face illuminated by the flames, shadows playing across the deer tattoo that marked his Raramuri heritage. Had this pup been separated from its family too? Or was it orphaned, driven by desperation to approach a human? Elena's breath quickened as shapes flickered at the edge of the tree line, dark silhouettes against the white, eyes catching the faint moonlight like embers. The pack was circling, drawn by the scent of food or weakness. The pup pressed tighter against her, its growl turning into a fierce snarl for such a small body, hackles raised. She grabbed a fallen branch, its weight awkward in her frozen grip, and whispered urgently, "Stay with me, little fighter. We face this together." The lead wolf emerged then, a massive grey beast with scars crisscrossing its muzzle, its breath steaming as it padded forward, testing the air. Elena's mind raced. Climb the tree, run! But her legs felt like lead, and the snow hid treacherous drops into ravines. In a surge of adrenaline, she stomped her foot, shouting into the gale, "Aléjate! This isn't your night!" The words echoed strangely, amplified by the cliffs, and the lead wolf paused, head tilting as if puzzled. The pup yipped sharply beside her, a high-pitched challenge that cut through the tension. For a heartbeat, the pack held back, the alpha's eyes locking onto Elena's with an intelligence that chilled her more than the cold. Then, with a huff, it turned, melting back into the shadows with its followers, their howls fading into the wind. Elena collapsed against the tree, the branch slipping from her numb fingers, her chest heaving. The pup licked her hand, a rough tongue that brought tears to her eyes, not of fear now, but gratitude. "You saved us, didn't you?" she breathed, pulling it closer. In that moment, amid the lingering threat of the wild, a bond solidified, fragile yet profound. But as dawn's grey light began to filter through the clouds, revealing a landscape of endless white ridges, Elena realized this was no end to her ordeal. The pup's presence raised more questions than answers. Where had it come from? And why did it seem to watch her with such knowing eyes, as if it carried a message from the mountains themselves? She rose stiffly, the pup trailing her every step, and scanned the horizon. Smoke? No, just mist rising from a hidden valley, but something pulled her southward, an instinct she couldn't name. Little did she know, this unlikely duo was drawing the attention of forces beyond the pack, searchers from the village perhaps, or echoes of ancient guardians stirring in the snow. The Sierra Madre whispered secrets, and Elena was just starting to listen. Elena pressed on through the thickening dawn, her boots sinking into the snow with each laborious step, the wolf pup trotting at her heels like a shadow, unwilling to be left behind. The Sierra Madre's ridges stretched out like the spine of some ancient beast, jagged and unforgiving, cloaked in a fresh layer of powder that muffled the world into an eerie hush. The air bit sharper now, carrying the crisp scent of pine resin and distant earth, but the storm's fury had ebbed, leaving behind a crystalline landscape that sparkled mockingly under the weak sun. Her body ached from the night's vigil, muscles knotted like ropes, fingers throbbing despite the pup's occasional nuzzles that brought fleeting warmth. Yet, with her new companion, the isolation felt fractured, replaced by a tentative rhythm. Her strides matched to the pup's eager bounds, their breaths mingling in synchronized clouds. She'd named him Lobo in her mind, a simple nod to his wild heritage, though he seemed anything but fierce. His golden eyes flicked up at her often, bright with a curiosity that tugged at her heartstrings, reminding her of the stray cats that wandered her village alleys, seeking scraps and affection. "What now, Lobo?" she whispered, more to herself than him, as she paused to catch her breath at the edge of a narrow ravine. Below, a frozen stream snaked through boulders, its surface a treacherous sheet of ice, veined with cracks. Crossing it meant risk. One wrong step, and the cold water beneath could claim her like so many before. But staying put wasn't an option. Her internal compass, honed from years of reading maps in her classroom, urged her south toward the warmer valleys, where Javier might have rallied help. Lobo whined, pawing at the snow as if sensing her hesitation, and darted ahead, testing the ice with delicate steps. It held, creaking faintly under his weight, and he looked back, tail wagging in short, expectant flicks. Elena smiled despite the knot of fear in her gut. "All right, show off, lead the way." She followed, heart in her throat, distributing her weight as the ice groaned like an old man's complaint. Halfway across, a sharp crack split the air, and her foot plunged through, icy water surging up to her calf. She yelped, yanking back just in time, the chill shooting through her like lightning. Lobo barked sharply, leaping to her side and nipping at her sleeve, pulling her forward with surprising strength for his size. They tumbled onto solid ground together, her laughter bubbling up through chattering teeth, relief mixed with the absurdity of it all. As they crested the next rise, the terrain shifted subtly, the pines giving way to clusters of oaks twisted by wind, their branches heavy with snow like burdened shoulders. Elena's mind wandered to the stories Javier had shared on their trek, his voice steady as he pointed out sacred sites. He'd spoken of the Kawiteri, The Raramuri's cave dwellings hidden in these cliffs, places where ancestors sought refuge from raiders long ago. "The mountains remember everything," he'd said, his calloused hands gesturing to the rock faces etched with petroglyphs of hunters and spirits. Javier himself was a descendant, born in a remote barranca village where families still ran the copper canyons for days without rest. Elena had envied his rootedness, so unlike her own uprooted life after Marco's betrayal. Now, scanning the horizon for any sign of smoke or trail, she wondered if Javier was out there, his hawk-like eyes searching the white expanse for her tracks. The pup's sudden freeze pulled her from her thoughts. Lobo's ears flattened, a low rumble building in his throat as he stared into a thicket of underbrush. Eleanor crouched beside him, her hand instinctively resting on his back, feeling the tension coil in his muscles. "What is it, boy?" The wind carried a faint clatter, not animal but mechanical, like loose metal rattling in the breeze. She crept forward, Lobo glued to her side, and parted the snow-laden branches to reveal a rusted pickup truck half buried in a drift, its faded red paint chipped and scarred. It looked abandoned, tires deflated against the frozen ground, but fresh boot prints circled it, leading off into the trees. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't natural debris from the storm. Someone had been here recently, perhaps a logger or a herder caught out, but the isolation screamed trouble. Peering inside the cab through the frosted window, Elena spotted a crumpled map on the seat, marked with red X's that matched her own route to the sacred cave. No keys, but a toolbox lay open in the bed, tools scattered like forgotten toys. Lobo sniffed the door, growling deeper, his hackles rising as if the vehicle held ghosts. "Easy," she soothed, though her own nerves jangled. This could be a lifeline, maybe a radio inside, or directions to the nearest road. But as she tugged the door open, a glint caught her eye. A silver locket dangling from the rear view, engraved with a familiar pattern, the interlocking diamonds from her abuela's knitting, a Tarahumara motif symbolizing protection. Her breath hitched. How? It couldn't be coincidence. Marco had given her a similar one years ago, lost in their divorce papers. Or had he? Before she could process it, a twig snapped behind her, close, deliberate. Elena whirled, Lobo lunging forward with a fierce bark that echoed off the rocks. From the shadows emerged a figure, bundled in a wool sarap dusted with snow, face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. He was older, maybe 60, with a weathered face like cracked leather and eyes sharp as flint. "No te muevas, señora," he called in a gravelly Spanish accent, raising a hand that held no weapon but trembled slightly. "These mountains play tricks. You lost?" His name, she learned quickly, was Tomas, a local goat herder from a nearby rancho, out checking his flock when the storm hit. He eyed Lobo warily, muttering about Lobo huérfano and bad omens, but offered a tin of jerky from his pack when Elena explained her plight. Tomas built a small fire in a sheltered hollow, his hands steady despite the cold, sharing tales of disappearances in these parts. Hikers vanishing without trace, blamed on spirits or worse, drug runners hiding in the barrancas. "Your guide, Javier? He's Raramuri, no? They know the land, but even they get claimed sometimes." Elena's stomach twisted as he described a recent case. A woman from Creel, much like her, gone 2 days before turning up frostbitten but alive, babbling about a wolf that led her home. Lobo perked up at the word, nuzzling her hand as if in recognition. Was it the same pack? Tomas watched them closely, his expression a mix of suspicion and something softer, like reluctant admiration. "That pup chose you. Rare thing. Means the mountains see something in your spirit." As the fire crackled, warming her bones and thawing her doubts, Elena felt the bond with Lobo deepen, his head resting on her knee like a child's. But Tomas's warnings lingered. The truck belonged to a prospector who'd vanished weeks ago, searching for the same gold legends that drew her. The locket, a family heirloom, he'd say, but his eyes darted away when she pressed. Tension coiled anew. Who was watching them now? And why did Lobo's gaze seem to hold secrets Tomas wouldn't voice? The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows, but Elena knew their respite was temporary. With Tomas as a reluctant guide, they pushed on, the pup's whispers of loyalty echoing in her soul, pulling her toward revelations buried deeper than the snow. The sun hung low in the sky like a tarnished coin, casting elongated shadows across the snow-dusted trail as Elena, Lobo, and Tomas trudged onward. The herder led the way with a practiced limp, his serape flapping like a weary flag against the chill breeze that whispered through the oaks. Elena's legs burned from the uneven ground, each step a negotiation with the hidden roots and icy patches that threatened to send her sprawling. Lobo bounded ahead occasionally, his small form weaving through the underbrush with an energy that belied the night's ordeal, only to circle back and press against her side, as if reminding her he was there. The pup's warmth was a constant now, a living talisman against the Sierra's creeping doubt, but Elena couldn't shake the unease that Tomas's stories had planted. Disappearances, omens, a locket that echoed her past. It all felt like threads pulling her deeper into the mountain's web. Tomas glanced back every few minutes, his flint-sharp eyes scanning her face before flicking to Lobo. "You walk like someone carrying ghosts, Senora," he said, his voice rough as gravel underfoot. He was a man shaped by solitude, his face etched with lines from decades tending goats in these remote barrancas, far from the chatter of creel. Widowed young, he'd raised 2 sons who now herded in the valleys below, leaving him to the company of his flock and the wind's tall tails. That truck back there belonged to old Ramiro, a fool chasing silver veins. Vanished last moon cycle, left his wife weeping in the rancho, and now his truck's a marker for the lost. Elena nodded, her mind replaying the locket's gleam, its diamonds mocking her with familiarity. Marco had pawned hers during their rough patches, claiming it for debts, but seeing that pattern here felt like the Sierra replaying her regrets in high relief. They crested a ridge where the land opened into a shallow basin, dotted with twisted junipers that clawed at the sky. Below, a cluster of goats huddled in a natural corral of boulders, their bells tinkling faintly like distant chimes. Tomas let out a low whistle, and the animals stirred, bleating in response as he descended to check them. Elena followed, Lobo darting to investigate the herd with curious sniffs. The air here smelled of damp wool and earth, a brief respite from the pine-heavy bite higher up. She sank onto a flat rock, rubbing her hands together to chase the numbness, watching Tomas coax a kid goat back from the edge of a drop-off. "You've got away with them," she called, forcing a smile to bridge the quiet, "like they trust you instinctively." He chuckled, a dry sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Trust is earned in blood and time, not words, like that pup of yours. Seen strays before, but none cling like he does to you." Lobo, as if summoned, trotted over and dropped a stick at her feet, tail wagging in playful invitation. Elena picked it up, tossing it lightly into a snow-free patch, and he pounced with a yip that echoed off the rocks. For a moment the weight lifted, her laughter mingling with the pup's joyful bounds, a spark of normalcy in the wild. But Tomas's gaze lingered, troubled. "Heard howls last night, closer than usual. Pack's leader, scarred muzzle, big as a pony. You fend them off?" She recounted the standoff by the tree, downplaying her fear, but his nod was grim. "Brave or lucky? Raramuri say wolves are messengers. If he's orphaned, he might be calling you to his place in the pack." As Tomas kindled a small fire with flint and dry tinder, his movements efficient, born of countless nights like this, Elena's thoughts drifted to Javier. Had he reached safety? The satellite phone in her pack was a dead weight, but perhaps Tomas had a way down to signal. "My guide, Javier. He's from these parts. Raramuri, like you mentioned. Do you know him?" Tomas paused, sparks flying into the dusk, his expression clouding. Javier Ruiz, runs trails for tourists, good man, fast feet. Heard he was out with a woman from the villages. You, I reckon. Word spread slow up here, but if he's not back by now. He trailed off, poking the flames with a stick. Elena's chest tightened, the implication hanging heavy. Missing, like Ramiro, like so many swallowed by the Sierra's maw. The fire's glow painted their faces in flickering orange, and Tomas shared his meager provisions, hard cheese wrapped in cloth, its tang sharp on the tongue, and flatbreads baked in his rancho's comal. Lobo gnawed on a scrap of goat hide, content at her feet, his eyes half closed in the warmth. Elena savored the meal, the simple act grounding her amid the swirl of questions. That locket in the truck, she ventured, the pattern, it's Tarahumara, right? Protection against spirits? Tomas's hand stilled on his knife. See, old symbol. Ramiro's mother wove it for him before he left for the cities, chasing dreams, said it kept evil at bay. But look where it got him. He leaned closer, voice dropping. Folks whisper about caves nearby, Kawiteri with walls that move. Gold? Maybe. But something darker guards it, shadows that take the greedy. A chill unrelated to the cold prickled Elena's skin. The cave Javier had promised. Was it one of those? Lobo stirred, whining softly and nuzzling her hand, his nose cold and insistent. She stroked his ears, feeling the rapid flutter of his pulse, and in that touch a whisper of reassurance bloomed. This pup, with his knowing gaze, felt like more than chance, a thread connecting her to the land's hidden pulse. But as night deepened, the goats' bells grew erratic, their bleats sharpening into alarm. Tomas stood abruptly, scanning the tree line. "Wolves!" he muttered, grabbing his staff. A gnarled branch topped with a goat horn. Lobo bolted upright, hackles rising, a growl building low in his throat. Elena rose, heart pounding, peering into the gloom where eyes glinted like scattered stars. The pack was back, shadows slinking closer, drawn by the fire's light and the scent of life. The scarred alpha led, its massive form silhouetted against the moonlit snow, muscles rippling under fur as it tested the air. Tomas banged his staff on a rock, shouting in Raramuri, a guttural chant that rolled like thunder. But the wolves held their ground, circling wider. Lobo lunged forward, barking furiously, positioning himself between Elena and the threat, his small body vibrating with defiance. "Get behind me," Tomas urged, but Elena couldn't move, transfixed by the alpha's stare, not hunger but calculation, as if weighing her worth. In a blur, Lobo charged, nipping at the alpha's flank before darting back, drawing the pack's focus. The big wolf snapped, missing by inches, and the others pressed in, a coordinated dance of menace. Adrenaline surged through Eleanor. She grabbed a burning branch from the fire, waving it high, the flames hissing in the wind. "Back off!" she yelled, her voice cracking but fierce, echoing Tomas's chant. The alpha hesitated, ears flicking, then retreated a step, the pack mirroring with reluctant growls. Lobo yipped triumphantly, returning to her side, but the standoff lingered, tension thick as fog. Tomas exhaled sharply, stamping out embers to dim the light. "They'll wait till we're weak. We move at first light. My rancho's a day's hike. Radio there for your people." Elena nodded, pulling Lobo close, his body trembling against hers. The encounter left her shaken, the bond with the pup now laced with fierce protectiveness. As they settled under an overhang of rock, sharing body heat against the dropping temperature, she whispered to him, "You're my little guardian, aren't you? What would I do without you?" His eyes met hers, golden and unwavering, and in the quiet, she swore she heard a soft, almost voice-like huff, a promise, or perhaps the mountains speaking through him. Dawn would bring new perils, but for now, the night held its breath, the Sierra's secrets coiling tighter around their fragile trio. Elena drifted into uneasy sleep, dreams haunted by howls and diamond patterns, unaware that the path ahead would test not just her survival, but the very heart of what family meant in the wild's unyielding embrace. Dawn crept over the Sierra Madre like a hesitant thief, painting the snow in pale blues and silvers that softened the night's sharp edges. Elena stirred under the rocky overhang, her body stiff as weathered leather, the chill having woven itself into her bones during the fitful sleep. Lobo was curled against her side, his small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, a furry anchor that had kept the worst of the cold at bay. Tomas was already up, methodically packing his meager camp, his gnarled hands moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd danced with Dawn too many times to count. The goats milled nearby, their bells a soft, irregular chorus, shaking off the frost from their coats, as if the mountain's threats were just another passing cloud. Elena sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, the dreams of howls and flickering diamonds fading like mist. Lobo's golden gaze met hers immediately, alert and affectionate, his tail thumping against the ground in a muffled beat. She scratched behind his ears, feeling the warmth of his fur seep into her fingers. "Morning, guardian," she murmured, her voice hoarse from the cold air. The pup leaned into her touch, a soft whine escaping him that sounded almost like contentment. Tomas glanced over, his weathered face creased with a half-smile that didn't quite chase the worry from his eyes. "Sleep like the dead, Senora. Good. The trail to my rancho twists like a snake today. Can't afford slow feet with that pack sniffing our heels." They broke camp swiftly, the fire's embers stamped out and scattered to hide their trail. Elena shouldered her backpack, lighter now but heavier with unspoken fears, and followed Tomas down the slope, Lobo scouting ahead with playful darts into the snowdrifts. The path narrowed into a ravine, walls of granite rising on either side like silent sentinels, etched with veins of quartz that caught the light in fleeting sparkles. Icicles hung from overhangs, dripping steadily as the sun climbed, turning the ground into a slick mosaic of melt and freeze. The air hummed with the distant rush of a thawing stream, carrying scents of wet stone and budding sage that hinted at life beyond the white shroud. Tomas led with his staff, tapping the ground ahead, probing for hidden crevices. He was a storyteller at heart, his gravelly voice weaving in and out of the silence to ease the tension. "My rancho's been in the family since my abuelo's time. 3 generations herding goats through these barrancas. Wife, God rest her, used to say the mountains were jealous lovers, always trying to steal you away." Elena listened, her boots crunching rhythmically, drawing parallels to her own fractured life. Rosa, her abuela, had spun similar yarns by the hearth, tales of the land's moods and the spirits that tugged at wandering souls. "Sounds like my abuela," she replied, her breath puffing out in clouds. "She'd warned me about chasing dreams too far from home. Guess I didn't listen." Lobo paused suddenly at a cluster of boulders, sniffing intently before digging at the snow with frantic paws. Elena knelt beside him, her heart quickening as he uncovered a small, frozen paw print, not wolf, but larger, clawed and deliberate. Tomas crouched too, his expression darkening. "Puma tracks. Fresh. They're ghosts in these parts. Strike when you're tired, alone." The word hung heavy, echoing Elena's isolation even with their trio. She thought of Javier again, his hawk-like vigilance that had vanished in the storm. Had he encountered something like this? Tomas straightened, scanning the ridges above. "Keep close. Lobo's nose might save us yet." The ravine widened into a meadow blanketed in shallower snow, dotted with hardy wildflowers pushing through the melt like stubborn promises. Elena's spirits lifted slightly, the open space feeling less like a trap, but the puma's shadow lingered in her mind. Lobo stayed nearer now, his body brushing her legs as they walked, his ears swiveling at every rustle. Tomas shared more about the disappearances, his tone matter-of-fact but laced with the weight of lived loss. Ramiro, the prospector, found his gear weeks later, scattered like the wind took him, but folks say he heard whispers in the caves calling him deeper. You're Javier. If he's Raramuri blood, he might know those whispers for what they are, tests from the old ones. Elena's mind reeled, the locket's diamonds flashing in her memory. Was Marco tangled in this somehow? The thought was absurd, but the Sierra twisted logic like vines. She voiced it haltingly, and Tomas's eyes narrowed. Cities breed strange connections. Heard of outsiders funding digs up here, gold fever mixed with darker trades. But a locket could be nothing, or a sign to turn back. Lobo whined then, pressing his head under her hand, as if sensing her turmoil. She knelt, cupping his face, staring into those knowing eyes. What do you think, little one? Lead me home, or deeper in? The trail steepened again, climbing toward a pass where the wind picked up, whipping flurries into their faces. Tomas pointed ahead to a faint plume of smoke curling from a hidden fold in the hills. His rancho, a cluster of adobe huts nestled against a cliff, goats dotting the terraced slopes like living stones. Relief washed over Eleanor, but it was short-lived. A sharp cry echoed from the rocks above, not human, but anguished, like a goat in distress. Tomas cursed under his breath, quickening his pace. One of mine. Predators don't wait for welcomes. They scrambled up the final incline, hearts pounding, Lobo charging ahead with barks that cut through the gale. At the edge of the rancho, they found chaos. A young goat cornered against a low wall by the scarred alpha wolf, its pack lurking in the shadows of the junipers. The herder's wife, Maria, a stout woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked braids and a face lined by sun and sorrow, waved a broom from the doorway, shouting in Raramuri. Her two grandsons, wiry boys, no older than 10, named Paco and Luis, hurled stones with trembling arms, their wide eyes fierce despite the fear. Elena froze, adrenaline surging as the alpha turned, its yellow gaze locking onto Lobo. The pup snarled, hackles raised, positioning himself protectively in front of the goat. Tomas bellowed a warning chant, staff raised, but the wolf lunged, not at the prey but at Lobo, jaws snapping in a blur of fangs. Elena screamed, "No!" and threw herself forward, grabbing a loose rock and hurling it with all her might. It struck the alpha's shoulder, eliciting a yelp that sent the pack scattering momentarily. Lobo darted in, nipping at the wolf's heels, driving it back toward the tree line. Maria rushed out, scooping the trembling goat into her arms, while Paco and Luis cheered, their voices high with awe. "The lady and the Lobo!" Paco yelled, his gap-toothed grin breaking through the tension. Tomas herded them all inside the main hut. A warm space thick with the aroma of simmering beans and wood smoke, the walls hung with woven blankets in Tarahumara patterns. Elena collapsed onto a low bench, Lobo leaping into her lap, panting but unharmed. Maria pressed a mug of hot atole into her hands, corn-based and sweet, chasing the cold from her core. "You fight like one of us," the woman said, her English accented but warm, eyes appraising the pup. He chose well. As the adrenaline ebbed, Tomas fiddled with an old shortwave radio in the corner, static crackling as he tried to raise help from Creel. "Signals spotty up here," he grumbled, but Eleanor clung to hope. Javier might hear, or rescuers already searching. Yet, as night fell outside, the pack's distant howls rose again, closer, more insistent. Lobo's ears perked from her lap, a low growl rumbling through him. Maria crossed herself, whispering of spirits restless in the caves nearby. Elena stroked the pup's fur, feeling his heart race against hers, and wondered if this refuge was truly safe, or if the mountains were drawing them all into a larger test, one where family wasn't just blood, but the fierce bonds forged in snow and shadow. The radio finally sputtered to life, with a faint voice from the valley, but before Tomas could respond, a heavy thud shook the door, something large, testing the latch. Eyes gleamed through the cracks, and Elena's blood ran cold. The alpha was here, not alone. and the whispers of the Sierra seemed to echo in Lobo's urgent whine, pulling her toward a choice that could change everything. The hut's wooden door rattled again, the thud reverberating through the adobe walls like a heartbeat gone wrong, sending a shiver down Elena's spine that had nothing to do with the encroaching night. She clutched Lobo tighter in her lap, the pup's body rigid against hers, his golden eyes fixed on the door with an intensity that bordered on fury. The radio's static hissed in the corner, the faint voice from Creel cutting in and out. "Rescat en ruta. Coordenadas?" But Tomas froze, his hand hovering over the microphone, staff gripped white-knuckled in the other. Maria's grandsons, Paco and Luis, huddled behind her skirts, their small faces pale under the lantern's flickering light, while Maria herself stood firm, broom in hand like a warrior's spear, her silver-streaked braids swaying as she muttered prayers in Raramuri. "Fuera!" Tomas bellowed, slamming his staff against the floorboards, the sound booming through the cramped space thick with the scent of wood smoke and spiced beans. Outside, the howls multiplied, a chorus that clawed at the edges of Elena's nerves, the Alpha's deep rumble cutting through like a blade. Lobo leaped from her lap with a savage snarl, his small frame vibrating as he planted himself in front of the door, hackles raised and teeth bared, in a way that made him seem twice his size. Elena's heart pounded. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was a siege, the Sierra's wild heart testing their fragile sanctuary. She rose unsteadily, grabbing a heavy iron poker from beside the hearth, its weight grounding her amid the chaos. "Tomas, the radio, tell them we're here now." He nodded grimly, twisting the dial as claws scraped against the door, splintering the wood in faint, ominous scratches. The voice crackled back, clearer this time. "Posición confirmada. Helicóptero en una hora. Manténganse a salvo." "No." Relief flickered in Elena's chest, but it was snuffed out as the door buckled inward, a massive grey paw shoving through the gap, yellow eyes blazing on the other side. The Alpha, its scarred muzzle twisted in a silent snarl, breath fogging the air, the pack's shadows shifting like ghosts beyond the threshold. Maria swung her broom, jabbing at the paw, while the boys hurled anything they could grasp, stones, a tin cup, their cries mixing with the wolves' growls in a cacophony that drowned the radio. Lobo lunged, snapping at the intruding paw with a ferocity that drew a yelp from the Alpha, forcing it back just enough for Tomas to bar the door with a heavy beam. The hut shook as the pack rammed against it, the walls groaning under the assault, dust sifting from the rafters. Elena pressed her back to the wall, poker raised, her mind racing through flashes of her life. The village classroom with its chalk-dusted desks, Rosa's warm embrace after a long day, even Marco's rare moments of tenderness before the lies unraveled it all. Was this how it ended? Not in a cave chasing gold, but defending a stranger's home with a pup who'd become her anchor. "We can't hold them forever," she gasped, sweat beading on her forehead despite the chill seeping through the cracks. Tomas's eyes met hers, flint hard but steady. "The old ways, Senora, fire and noise, they fear the spirits we carry." He snatched a burning log from the hearth, thrusting it through a narrow window slit, the flames hissing as they met the night air. The pack recoiled with startled yips, the Alpha barking orders that sent them circling wider, but the assault didn't stop. Lobo paced frantically, whining between growls, his gaze darting to Eleanor as if pleading for a decision only she could make. Maria pulled the boys close, her voice a low chant, invoking the Kawiteri Guardians, the ancient protectors of the barrancas who'd warded off raiders for centuries. Paco peeked out, whispering, "The Lobo's brave like the stories. Is he a spirit too?" The question hung in the air, stirring something deep in Elena, a connection she'd felt since the pup first nuzzled her hand, whispering that impossible plea in her dreams. "Can you be my mama?" It wasn't just words, it was the raw need in his eyes, mirroring her own ache for family after Marco's betrayal left her adrift. "Here, In this besieged hut, with the mountains howling their judgment, she realized Lobo wasn't a stray. He was a choice, a bond forged in the wild that demanded she step up. "Lobo, stay," she commanded softly, but he ignored her, bolting to the door and scratching at it insistently, as if urging her to follow his lead. Another thud splintered the beam, the door cracking open an inch, cold wind rushing in with the stench of wet fur and bloodlust. Elena surged forward, poker swinging, her shout joining Tomas's chant, "No pasaran!" The alpha's head forced through, jaws gaping, but Lobo was there first, leaping with a cry that pierced the din. He clamped onto the wolf's ear, twisting with all his might, drawing a roar that shook the hut. Elena jabbed the poker into the gap, the heated tip singeing fur and eliciting a pained retreat. The pack faltered, howls turning to confused whines, the alpha limping back into the shadows with Lobo's blood on its muzzle. Not fatal, but enough to break the charge. Panting, Elena barricaded the door anew, her arms trembling as she slid down to the floor, pulling Lobo into her embrace. He licked the scrapes on her hands, his tongue rough and warm, eyes shining with a mix of triumph and exhaustion. Tomas slumped against the wall, radio clutched like a lifeline, while Maria distributed hurried sips of atole to steady their nerves. "The helicopter's coming," he said, voice rough with fatigue. "But those beasts, they'll regroup. Dawn's our only grace." Outside, the howls faded to distant echoes, but the tension coiled tighter, the Sierra's breath still hot on their necks. Elena stroked Lobo's fur, feeling his heartbeat sync with hers, a quiet promise amid the wreckage. The locket's diamonds haunted her thoughts, Ramiro's or Marco's shadow reaching even here, and Javier out there somewhere, or claimed by the same whispers Tomas feared. As the radio promised rescue, Elena wondered if salvation meant leaving Lobo behind, or if the pup's plea had rewritten her path entirely. The night stretched on, the hut a fragile island in the storm, and in the quiet lulls, Lobo's soft nuzzle against her palm felt like a question. Would she claim this family, or let the mountains take it all? The first rotors thrummed in the distance, a mechanical heartbeat cutting through the wind, but as lights pierced the darkness, new shadows stirred in the ravine below, figures on horseback, not rescuers, their lanterns swinging like will-o'-the-wisps. Who were they? Allies or the darker forces Tomas had hinted at, drawn by the gold siren call? Lobo's ears perked, a low growl rumbling anew, and Elena's grip tightened. The test wasn't over. It was evolving, pulling her deeper into the wild's embrace. The rotor's distant thrum grew into insistent roar, slicing through the night's veil like a promise of deliverance. But Elena's pulse thrummed faster at the sight of those flickering lanterns below the ravine. She peered through the hut's narrow window slit, the glass fogged with her breath, watching the horseback figures weave up the slope. 3, maybe 4, their silhouettes bulky under ponchos that billowed like dark sails. Not the clean lines of rescuers. These riders moved with a purposeful stealth, horses' hooves muffled by the snow, as if the Sierra itself conspired to hide their approach. Lobo's growl deepened in her lap, his body coiled like a spring, golden eyes locked on the shadows outside. "Who are they?" she whispered, her voice tight, glancing at Tomas, who stood rigid by the radio, staff in hand. Tomas's face, etched deeper by the lantern's glow, twisted in suspicion. "Not mine," he muttered, his gravelly tone laced with the wariness of a man who'd seen too many strangers in these barrancas. Maria hushed the boys, Paco and Luis now wide-eyed and silent behind her, clutching woven blankets like shields, while she stirred the embers in the hearth, the scent of charred wood mingling with the lingering tang of atole. The helicopter's lights swept the ridge above, a beam cutting through the flurries like a searchlight, but the riders pressed on, one dismounting to tether his horse to a juniper, his voice carrying faintly in accented Spanish. "Aquí! The signal's from this hut!" Elena's stomach knotted. They knew about the radio. Were they help or the darker trades Tomas had hinted at, prospectors, or worse, those chasing the gold legends with ruthless intent? The door rattled once more, not from wolves this time, but a heavy knock that echoed like judgment. Lobo leapt down, barking sharply, his small frame blocking the threshold as if he could will it shut. Tomas motioned Elena back, his limp more pronounced as he approached, poker from the fire now in his free hand. "Quédese quieta," he warned her, then called out, "¿Quién anda ahí? Speak your business." The response came muffled through the wood. "Somos del Rancho de Creil." Heard the call. "Storm took out half the trails. Open up, we've got supplies." The voice was rough, edged with fatigue, but something in its cadence prickled Elena's instincts, the same clipped rhythm she'd heard from Marco's city friends, the ones who'd show up unannounced with deals that smelled of trouble. Hesitation gripped the room like frost. Maria crossed to Elena's side, her sturdy hand squeezing the younger woman's shoulder, eyes fierce under her braids. "No confíes fácil. These mountains hide faces." The boys whispered to each other, Paco clutching a small, carved wooden wolf, Luis's gift from a festival. While outside, the helicopter circled closer, its downdraft whipping snow into eddies that danced around the hut. Lobo's barks turned frantic, pawing at the door, as if torn between defense and curiosity. Elena knelt beside him, her fingers threading through his fur, feeling the rapid thump of his heart mirror her own. "Easy, Lobo. We're in this together." In that touch, the pup's impossible whisper echoed in her mind again. "Can you be my mama?" A dream voice that had haunted her since their first night, pulling at the raw edges of her longing for connection after Marco's lies left her hollow. Tomas unbarred the door a crack, cold air rushing in with the scent of horse sweat and damp leather. Two men stood there, faces shadowed under wide hats, one tall and lean, with a scar tracing his jaw like a lightning bolt, the other shorter, bundled in a coat patched with mismatched wool. The tall one, who introduced himself as Diego, held up a satchel. "Food, blankets, from the search party. Javier Ruiz sent us, said a woman's lost up here, matches your call." Elena's breath caught at Javier's name. Alive, then. Relief flooded her, but it tangled with doubt as Diego's eyes flicked to Lobo, narrowing. "That pup belongs to the pack that's been raiding herds. Dangerous to keep." The shorter man, Raúl, pushed past with a grunt, stamping snow from his boots, his gaze sweeping the hut like he owned it. He was the talker, his Spanish rapid and laced with valley slang, dropping the satchel by the fire. "Storm's a devil, lost 2 riders already. But we track well," followed the howls. Maria eyed him coolly, ladling atole into mugs without a word, while the boys peeked from their corner, Paco whispering, "They smell like the bad men in Abuela's stories." Elena accepted a mug, the warmth seeping into her chilled hands, but her eyes stayed on Raúl's coat pocket, where a glint of silver peeked out. The edge of a locket, diamonds interlocking in that familiar pattern. Her heart stuttered. "That necklace," she said, voice steady despite the tremor. "Where'd you get it?" Raúl's hand covered it instinctively, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Family thing. Why?" Diego shifted, exchanging a glance with his partner, the air thickening with unspoken currents. Outside, the helicopter's roar peaked, hovering now, its spotlight bathing the ravine in harsh white, illuminating more riders below. 5, no, 6, circling the goat's corral with an efficiency that screamed coordination. Tomas tensed, staff tapping the floor. "Search party, you say? Then why the extra hands? This ain't a trail ride." The men's faces hardened, Raúl stepping closer to Elena, his breath sour with tobacco. "Javier's waiting down the slope. Come on, choppers for the week. We got horses." Lobo's growl escalated into a snarl, lunging at Raúl's leg, teeth grazing the fabric before Elena pulled him back. The pup's eyes burned with warning, his body pressing against her like a shield. In that instant, clarity sliced through the fog. These weren't saviors. The locket, the pack's sudden boldness, Javier's name dropped too casually. It reeked of the shadows Tomas feared, outsiders tangled in the gold chase, perhaps even linked to Marco's old debts. Elena's mind flashed to her blog, the legends she'd chased, drawing eyes she never knew. "No," she said firmly, stepping between Raoul and the door. "We wait for the chopper, all of us." Tension crackled like the fire's dying sparks. Diego's hand drifted to his belt where a knife hilt gleamed, and Raoul's false smile cracked. "Suit yourself, Senora, but the wolves are circling, and so are we." The door slammed open then, wind howling in, as the pack's alpha burst from the tree line, drawn by the commotion, its scarred form barreling toward the hut. Chaos erupted. Lobo charged out with a defiant yip, nipping at the wolf's flanks, while Tomas swung his staff, Maria herding the boys to the back. Elena grabbed the poker, heart roaring, following Lobo into the fray as the helicopter descended, ropes dropping like lifelines. The alpha snapped at Lobo, but the pup dodged, drawing it away from the riders who scattered, cursing. Elena swung the poker, connecting with a solid thud that sent the beast yelping into the snow. Riders fired shots, warning blasts that echoed off the cliffs, but the chopper's crew rappelled down, armed with rifles and shouts of "Alto! Authorities!" The intruders bolted, horses thundering into the dark, leaving the locket glinting in the dropped satchel. As medics swarmed the hut, wrapping Elena in a blanket, Lobo returned to her side, nuzzling her hand with that same insistent warmth. Javier's voice cut through the din. He was there, frostbitten but whole, eyes lighting at the sight of her. "Elena, thought we'd lost you." Relief crashed over her, but as the chopper lifted them into the night, the Sierra's lights fading below, Elena held Lobo close, his whisper echoing real now in her soul. The pup had chosen her, and in the wild's brutal test, she'd chosen back. Yet questions lingered. The locket's owner, the rider's ties to her past, the pack's relentless pursuit. The mountains had given her a family of fur and fierce loyalty, but their secrets weren't done whispering. As Creel's lights twinkled on the horizon, Elena knew the true homecoming, and the final unraveling awaited below. The helicopter's blades whipped the snow into a frenzy as it hovered above the rancho, its floodlights carving stark paths through the night, illuminating the chaos below like a stage lit for some final dramatic act. Elena clung to the rope ladder, her muscles screaming from the night's battles, as the medic, a sturdy woman named Carla, with a no-nonsense braid and gloves that smelled of antiseptic, helped hoist her aboard. Lobo squirmed in her arms, his paws scrabbling against the metal floor once they were inside, but he settled quickly when she pulled him close, his warm weight a counterpoint to the cold rush of air through the open door. Javier was already strapped in across from her, his sun-leathered face gaunt and shadowed by a weak stubble, but his hawk-like eyes lit with relief as they locked on hers. "Elena," he rasped, reaching out a bandaged hand. "I thought the storm had taken you for good, searched every ravine, every cave mouth." She squeezed his fingers, the touch grounding her amid the rotor's thunder. "You made it back. And this—" She glanced at Lobo, who nuzzled her palm with that insistent, almost pleading pressure, his golden eyes reflecting the cabin lights like hidden stars. "He found me. Saved me more times than I can count." Javier's gaze softened on the pup, a faint smile cracking his weary expression. "The little Lobo. Raramuri tales speak of such bonds, spirits in animal form, guiding the lost home. You were right to push for the cave. I should have trusted your fire." But his words carried a weight, hints of the ordeals he'd faced alone. Frostbite on his toes, nights huddled in a shallow dugout, whispering to the ancestors for strength. Tomas and Maria watched from below, the herder's staff planted firm as he waved them off. Maria's grandsons clinging to her skirts with wide-eyed awe. Paco yelled something lost to the wind. "Vuelve con el lobo!" And Elena's throat tightened at the sight of their makeshift family, forged in firelight and fear. The chopper lifted, banking toward Creel, the Sierra Madre shrinking to a dark, undulating sea of ridges and secrets. Carla checked Elena's vitals, wrapping a thermal blanket around her and Lobo, her voice cutting through the noise. "Hypothermia's a sneaky bastard up here. Rest now. We've got you." But rest was impossible with the satchel from the riders clutched in Elena's lap, the silver locket spilling out like a final riddle. As the valley lights grew brighter, Elena pried it open under the dim cabin bulb. Inside, a faded photo, a woman with dark curls and brown eyes, smiling beside a man who could pass for Marco's brother. Same sharp jaw, same sly grin. No, not a brother. The inscription read, "Para mi amor, siempre tuyo, Marco." Her ex-husband, tangled in this web somehow. Anger flared hot in her chest, chasing away the cold's remnants. Javier leaned over, frowning at the image. Ramiro was his contact? The prospector. I heard whispers in Creel. Marco owed debts to city sharks, sent Ramiro up here for the gold legends. When the storm hit, I got separated, but I found Ramiro's camp. Empty, gear scattered. Thought he'd run off, but now... His voice trailed, the pieces clicking. The riders, the pack's unnatural boldness, perhaps even lured to flush out searchers like bait. Elena stroked Lobo's ears, the pup's soft huff against her skin, a balm. He used my blog post to track me, chasing his debts through my dreams. The realization stung, but it freed something too. Her chase for treasure wasn't folly. It was a mirror, reflecting the betrayals she'd fled. Javier nodded, his quiet demeanor cracking with shared fury. "We report it all. The authorities in Creel will dig. Those riders won't slink away clean." Carla, overhearing, jotted notes on a pad, her expression grim. "Sounds like cartel fringes. We've had reports of outsiders stirring trouble in the barrancas. Your pup here? He's a hero. We'll quarantine him gentle, but he's yours if you want." The chopper touched down on a helipad outside Creel's modest hospital, the night air alive with the hum of emergency crews and flashing lights. Medics swarmed, wheeling Javier away for treatment, while Elena followed on foot, Lobo trotting loyally at her heels, drawing stares from nurses who cooed over his matted fur and bright eyes. Inside, the warmth hit like a hug. Sterile halls smelling of coffee and bleach, a far cry from the pine-scented wild. Rosa was there, waiting in the lobby, her wrinkled hands twisting a knitted scarf in the same diamond pattern as the locket. "Mija," she breathed, enveloping Elena in an embrace that smelled of corn and sage, tears wetting Elena's shoulder. "The village prayed for you. Sophia called me at dawn, said you were chasing ghosts again." Elena pulled back, showing her the locket. "Not ghosts, abuela, debts and wolves, but look who came with me." Lobo sat prettily, tail wagging as Rosa knelt, her eyes widening with wonder. "A spirit guardian, clear as day. The mountains gave you back more than you lost." They sat in a quiet room later after Elena's checks, mild hypothermia, nothing a hot meal and rest couldn't mend, sharing stories by a window overlooking the twinkling town. Javier joined them, hobbling on crutches, confirming the riders' ties. Marco had confessed via a panicked call to authorities, spilling about his scheme to use the gold hunt to settle scores with shady backers. The locket was Ramiro's, pawned from Elena's own past, a cruel loop closed by the Sierra's unyielding truth. As dawn painted the sky in soft pinks, Elena stepped outside with Lobo leashed loosely, the pup's steps light on the gravel path. The village stirred, vendors setting up markets with fresh tortillas steaming, children chasing roosters in the dust. Sophia waved from her doorway, eyes misty. "Heard you brought home a wild one. Fitting for you, dreamer." Elena laughed, the sound free and full, kneeling to unclip the leash. Lobo didn't bolt. He stayed, nuzzling her hand once more, that whisper echoing in her soul. Not words, but a bond deeper than blood. "You're my family now, little one," she murmured, and he yipped as if agreeing. Back in her classroom weeks later, Elena wove the tale into her lessons, not of gold or loss, but of resilience, the Raramuri spirit in every runner, every guardian pup. Her blog exploded with the story, not for treasure, but for the heart of it. A woman left alone in the snow, finding mamahood in the wild's fierce whisper. Marco faded to a footnote, his debts his own to chase, while Javier became a friend, guiding safer trails. Tomas sent word from the rancho, a new kid goat born under a full moon, named Elena. And Lobo? He slept at her feet each night, his golden eyes watching over dreams no longer haunted but alive with promise. The Sierra Madre had tested her, broken her open, and rebuilt her stronger. In its shadows, she'd found not just survival, but a love that howled back against the wind. And as she looked to the mountains from her village window, she knew the wild always called home those willing to listen.